On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy planes took off from Florida on a routine training flight. They never came back. The rescue plane sent to find them never came back either, and no confirmed trace of any of them has ever been found. December 5, 1945, 2:10 in the afternoon, Naval Air Station, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers roll down the runway and lift into a clear December sky. 14 men, 6 Navy, 8 Marines. Their mission, navigation problem number 1, a 3-legged triangular training exercise over the Bahamas. It was supposed to take 2 hours and 40 minutes. None of them would ever land again. 90 minutes into the flight, a voice came over the radio at NAS Fort Lauderdale. It was one of the student pilots. He had asked his crew for a compass reading, and the reply he got back was not a number. It was a sentence. "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." Minutes later, the flight leader himself came on. Both of his compasses, he said, were out. He was over land, broken, interrupted land, and he was certain he was somewhere in the Florida Keys. The problem was that the Florida Keys were hundreds of miles away. Flight 19 was exactly where it was supposed to be, northeast of Fort Lauderdale, above the Bahamas. But their leader did not know that. By the time radio contact finally grew too faint to maintain, Flight 19 had been airborne for more than 4 hours. Land radar stations had triangulated their position. Somewhere north of the Bahamas, east of the Florida coast, out over open Atlantic. The last transmission anyone clearly heard from the flight leader came at approximately 6:20 in the evening. He was calling his pilots together, telling them to prepare to ditch, that fuel was nearly gone, that when the first plane dropped below 10 gallons, they would all go down together. Then static. Then nothing. Not a single confirmed trace has ever been found. If America's unexplained mysteries keep you up at night, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Mystionix USA so you never miss what we uncover next. Hit the like button if this story is already getting to you. And now, let's go back to the beginning. The war had been over for 4 months. The men coming through NAS Fort Lauderdale in December 1945 were not combat veterans on their last missions. Many were students, pilots accumulating the flight hours and navigation experience they needed before graduation. Navigation problem number 1 was one of the standard exercises. It was called problem number 1 because it was the simplest one. Hundreds of students had done it. Nothing about it was supposed to go wrong. The instructor assigned to lead Flight 19 was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, 28 years old, a combat veteran with 2,509 hours of total flight time, including 606 hours in the Avenger. He had completed a full combat tour in the Pacific aboard USS Hancock. He was, by any measure, an experienced pilot. But there was one critical detail. Taylor had only recently transferred to Fort Lauderdale from NAS Miami, and this was the first time he would be leading this particular navigation syllabus. He had requested not to fly that afternoon, but no replacement was available. The route was straightforward on paper. From NAS Fort Lauderdale, the flight would head east 56 nautical miles to Hens and Shoals for practice bombing. Then east another 67 nautical miles, then north 73 nautical miles over Grand Bahama Island, then southwest 120 nautical miles back to base. Flight 19 departed at 2:10 p.m. and reached the bombing range on schedule. The practice run was completed. At that point, everything was on track. At approximately 3:40 p.m., the first distress transmission was intercepted by Lieutenant Robert Cox, another flight instructor flying in the same area. As Cox radioed back and reached Taylor directly. Taylor's voice was anxious. Both of his compasses, he said, were out. He was certain he was in the Florida Keys, somewhere south of Miami, over the Gulf of Mexico side. Cox told him to fly west. That would bring any lost pilot home from the Keys. But Taylor wasn't in the Keys. He was in the Bahamas, northeast of Fort Lauderdale. Flying north, as Taylor intended, would not find the coast. It would find the open Atlantic. Every mile he flew northeast took the flight farther out over the open Atlantic. The other pilots in the flight knew something was wrong. A radio transmissions intercepted by the base include one pilot saying bitterly, "Damn it! If we would just fly west, we would get home." But Taylor was the flight leader. The other pilots followed. At one point, Taylor was persuaded to turn west, but he canceled the order shortly after 6 p.m. As the hours passed, conditions deteriorated. The afternoon became evening. The calm training weather gave way to building winds and rough seas. Land radar stations were eventually able to triangulate Flight 19's approximate position, north of the Bahamas, east of the Florida coast. But this information was not passed to air traffic control in time to redirect the flight. At 6:20 p.m., the last transmission was intercepted. Taylor calling his pilots together, telling them to prepare to ditch. After that, nothing from Flight 19 was ever heard again. At 7:27 p.m., a Martin PBM-5 Mariner flying boat launched from NAS Banana River, approximately 150 miles north of Fort Lauderdale, with 13 men aboard, commanded by Lieutenant Walter Jeffrey. 3 minutes after takeoff, the Mariner checked in with its base. That was its last transmission. At approximately 7:50 p.m., the crew of a merchant vessel reported seeing a sudden burst of flames, estimated at 100 feet high, in the direction the Mariner had flown. By the time searchers reached the location, there was only an oil slick and a few debris fragments. 27 men and 6 aircraft had now vanished. The search that followed was the largest air and sea rescue operation in American history up to that point. Over 5 days, more than 300 aircraft and dozens of ships combed 300,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. Not an Avenger, not a life raft, not a body. In 1991, treasure hunters found 5 World War II-era Avengers on the ocean floor near Fort Lauderdale. When researchers checked the serial numbers against naval records, not one of them matched the aircraft of Flight 19. The Navy Board of Investigation reached a conclusion quickly. Lieutenant Taylor had made a critical navigational error. He had confused the Bahamas for the Florida Keys. He had flown the flight northeast when he should have flown west. The original report assigned the cause directly to Taylor's misjudgment, but Taylor's mother, Catherine Taylor, refused to accept that verdict. She lobbied the Navy for 2 years. In 1947, the amended conclusion read, "The flight disappeared for reasons or causes unknown." That phrase, "causes unknown," is the official finding to this day. What most historians and aviation investigators believe happened to Flight 19 is not mysterious in the paranormal sense. Taylor's compasses were malfunctioning, or he was misreading them. When he looked at the scattered cays and islands of the northern Bahamas below him, he saw what his mind was already expecting. The scattered keys of the southern Florida coast. He turned the flight northeast and flew them out over the open Atlantic instead. As darkness fell and fuel ran out, 5 Avengers ditched somewhere in the ocean north of the Bahamas. In the darkness, in the rough seas, the chances of survival were essentially zero. The disappearance of the rescue mariner is actually less mysterious than the loss of Flight 19, though no less tragic. The PBM Mariner was nicknamed the Flying Gas Tank by the crews who flew it. Its large hull and complex fuel system made it extremely susceptible to fuel vapor accumulation, and in-flight fires or explosions were a known hazard. The merchant ship SS Gaines Mills, which witnessed the explosion at 7:50 p.m., was in exactly the area where the Mariner would have been flying, as the most likely explanation is that the Mariner exploded in midair while searching for Flight 19. Flight 19 did not vanish in the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle did not exist in December 1945. The term was not coined until the 1950s, in a magazine article that referenced Flight 19 and several other incidents as evidence of a mysterious pattern. It was a narrative imposed on the case after the fact, driven by the cultural appetite for mystery in the post-war years. Before the triangle mythology attached itself to Flight 19, the story was understood as what it most likely was: a training accident caused by navigational confusion or compounded by equipment failure, bad weather, and the irreversible momentum of a flight leader who could not be talked out of a mistake he could not recognize. The radar triangulations made during the final hour of the flight placed Flight 19 north of the Bahamas and east of the Florida coast, in deep Atlantic water, roughly in the area where dozens of ships and aircraft have passed without incident every day for a century. There was nothing supernaturally significant about the location. There was a confused pilot, a deteriorating weather situation, darkness coming on, and 5 aircraft with not enough fuel to make it back to land. The Atlantic Ocean is simply very large. 14 men flew on Flight 19. 6 were Navy personnel. 8 were Marines. Most of the student pilots had logged approximately 300 flight hours. None of them had any reason to believe this flight would be different from the ones before it. They had survived the Second World War and were doing what peacetime naval training was supposed to be: routine work, the kind of mission so ordinary it didn't warrant more than a passing mention in the day's operations log. In 2015, a newspaper report described a discovery that briefly electrified the world of Flight 19 research. A hunter in the woods near Sebastian, to Florida, had found a wrecked World War II-era Avenger with Navy markings, and 2 bodies still inside. Initial reports stated the Navy had identified it as belonging to Flight 19 in the mid-1960s, but had kept the information classified. The Navy subsequently issued a retraction. As of today, the identity of the aircraft and the 2 men inside it has not been publicly confirmed. In 1992, a separate underwater expedition located scattered debris on the ocean floor near Fort Lauderdale that was identified as World War II-era aircraft wreckage. Investigators could not confirm whether any of it came from Flight 19. In the 2000s, searchers expanded the search area farther east, into the deeper Atlantic. No confirmed identification has ever been made. The total loss of that December afternoon was 27 men and 6 aircraft. 14 from Flight 19, 13 from the Mariner. In April 2017, a commemorative plaque was installed at the former NAS Banana River Seaplane Ramp, now Patrick Air Force Base, dedicated to the crew of the Mariner, each name listed. For decades, the story of the Mariner's crew was overshadowed by the mystery of Flight 19. They were the men who went out to find the lost and were lost themselves. Flight 19 entered popular culture in a way few military incidents ever have. In Steven Spielberg's 1977 film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the missing Avengers of Flight 19 appear in the desert, perfectly preserved, returned by extraterrestrials. It was fiction, but it captured something real about the place the case occupied in the American imagination. Bermuda Triangle books, documentaries, and television specials multiplied through the 1970s and 1980s. Flight 19 became the symbol of the Triangle's supposed power. The rational explanation for Flight 19 is unsatisfying in a specific way. It means that 14 men died because one experienced pilot on one afternoon made one navigational error that he could not be talked out of. There is no villain. There is no supernatural force. There is only a man who looked at the Bahamas and saw the Keys, who turned northeast when he should have turned west, and who took 13 other men with him into the dark. That is not a comforting answer, but it is, most likely, the true one. The United States Coast Guard does not officially recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a zone of unusual danger. Lloyd's of London does not charge higher premiums for passage through the Triangle than for other comparable stretches of ocean. Statistical analyses of shipping and aviation losses in the region show no anomalous pattern above what would be expected for any heavily trafficked stretch of Atlantic. The Bermuda Triangle is a storytelling device, not a geographical phenomenon. 5 aircraft, 14 men. A training flight so routine it was called Problem Number 1. They took off in the early afternoon and never landed. Their voices faded on the radio as they flew northeast into the dark. A rescue plane went after them and exploded in the night. 300,000 square miles of ocean produced nothing. The Triangle did not take them. The ocean took them, and the ocean has never given them back. The area where Flight 19 most likely ditched is approximately 200 to 300 miles northeast of Fort Lauderdale, in water several thousand feet deep. The 5 Avengers are probably there, in pieces on the seafloor, unrecognizable after nearly 80 years. The 14 men are gone. The official verdict is cause unknown. The mystery of Flight 19 is not that something impossible happened in a haunted patch of ocean. The mystery is that an ordinary training flight on an ordinary afternoon became one of the most famous disappearances in American history, and that even the most likely explanation has never been confirmed by a single piece of wreckage. December 5th, 1945, 2:10 in the afternoon. 5 planes took off from Fort Lauderdale. At 6:20 in the evening, a voice said, "Prepare to ditch," and then the radio went silent. A rescue plane left at 7:27 and exploded in the dark. And then there was nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no final transmission, No confirmed sighting, no answer. 27 men flew out over the Atlantic that December afternoon and did not come back. And the question of exactly what happened in those final hours, in that final darkness, over that final stretch of open water, remains officially, formally, and truthfully unknown. This mystery is still open. And at Mistyonics USA, we keep looking. If this story got under your skin, subscribe, like, and drop your theory in the comments. What do you think really happened to Flight 19? We'll see you in the next mystery.